Hello. Before the video starts, I would like to apologize for the very crunchy audio. Other than that, please get into it and enjoy. Goodbye.
Howdy hello, my fine fellows. It's me, Buttergo, aka Theseus. Today I figured we would do something a little bit different than my usual content. Today we are going to be talking about psychology! Yippee! So let's get right into it. Well, I know you may be wondering, what exactly is psychology? Well, I'll tell you what it's definitely not. One of those TikTok POVs that you see everywhere. Those are stupid. Well, according to the basic definition of psychology, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. It's a scientific process that aims to study the mind and behaviors of a person. Something that factors into psychology is the act of critical thinking, defined as the objective analysis of and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. To put it in simpler terms, it's what allows us to solve problems through understanding. It's a purely objective state of thinking, which means it's not influenced by personal feelings. But before we get further into that, let's learn about the origin of psychology. The first evidence we have of psychology is from ancient Greek philosophers Socrates and Plato. They believed that the mind is separate from the body, and they believed that knowledge was innate. A little further down the line, Aristotle explained how he believes that knowledge grows from experience. Way longer down the line, we come to a French philosopher that lived from around the 16th to the 17th centuries, named René Descartes, who believed that the brain cavities contain spirit, and he posed the question that if the mind and body are separate, then how do they communicate? And lastly, in this long line, around the 17th to 18th centuries, John Locke proposed the theory of empiricism. That knowledge comes from experience in science. However, around the 19th century, we got our first ever defined version of psychology from a man named Wilhelm Wundt. He would later go on to be dubbed the father of psychology, and he managed to separate the concept of psychology from philosophy and created the first ever psychology lab in 1879 at a German university. They took measurements of elements of the mind by examining an experiment where he made participants listen to a metronome and later asked how it made them feel. Wilhelm Wundt took in a student named G. Stanley Hall, who was an American, and he established the first formal U.S. psychology lab at Johns Hopkins, allowing for the U.S. to join in the endeavor that is defining psychology. Later, psychology gained what was defined as the schools of thought. It was used in order to create structuralism and was introduced by Edward Bradford Titchener and Wilhelm Wundt, and it used introspection to reveal the structure of the human mind. In a similar way to the periodic table of elements, it sought to define the elements that make up a consciousness. There were then 7 defined schools of thought, first of the 7 being functionalism, which focused on the mental and behavioral processes. By defining how they enable us to adapt, survive, and flourish, it was heavily influenced by Charles Darwin's theories of evolution. It sought to understand the adaptive function of consciousness, not the structure. The second school of thought was behaviorism, which was introduced by John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. The objective was the scientific study of observable behavior. The school of thought believed that mental processes were not measurable. The school of thought is famous for consequences and rewards in classical conditioning, researched by B.F. Skinner and Ivan Pavlov, respectively. The third school of thought is psychoanalysis, and it was introduced by Sigmund Freud. He will also be relevant later down the line. It focuses on the unconscious mind and motives and on the impact that our childhood experiences have on our current selves, and it emphasized the use of free association and dream analysis. The fourth school of thought was the school of humanism, which was introduced by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. It emphasized the potential for human growth. The fifth school of thought is the cognitive school, which focuses on memories and thinking, while the sixth school of thought is the evolutionary school, which studies traits and behaviors adapted for survival. The seventh school of thought, however, is the socio-cultural school of thought, which focused on how social and cultural circumstances affect later on adulthood experiences. So we tend to think that we know more than we do, and that is called overconfidence. Another such thing is known as hindsight bias, aka the I knew it all along effect. In order to research psychology, many must adopt the scientific attitude, which is composed of curiosity, skepticism, and humility, thereby removing themselves from the I knew it all along effect. This contributes to the scientific method. The first step of the scientific method is to introduce a theory to test. A theory is an explanation that integrates principles, organizes observations, and predicts behaviors or events. After you introduce the theory, you have to come up with a hypothesis, a testable prediction. There are two different kinds of hypotheses called the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between the variables being studied, while the alternative hypothesis states that there is a relationship between the variables being studied and is often written as an if-then statement. There are 4 different types of research methods related to testing the hypothesis, the first of which is research itself, the process of testing the hypothesis. The second of which is descriptive, which are methods that describe behavior. The third of which is correlational, which is when you identify the relationship between 2 variables. The last method of research is experimental, when you manipulate the variables in order to discover the cause and the effect. However, when looking at research or creating your own, watch out for things that could alter the viewing of the research. For example, you might want to watch out for experimenter bias, mismatched validity, confirmation bias, extraneous variables, confounding variables, the placebo effect, the Hawthorne effect, and belief perseverance. Now we're going to focus on the 3 different types of descriptive research: case studies, naturalistic observation, and surveys. Case studies are when a scientist focuses on one person and studies them in depth over a very long period of time. A large amount of time, usually being their entirety of their life. Oftentimes, it is used to study psychological disorders and is a very time-consuming process. Now, naturalistic observation is an in-depth study of a phenomenon in its natural setting and has the least amount of researcher interference. And the researcher is able to look at a much larger group of people than in a case study, which strengthens the ability of the results to be applied to the general population. The last of these forms of research is surveys, which is the technique used to discover self-reported attitudes, opinions, or behaviors of people. Often the way that this is carried out is by questioning a random sample of people. It provides a great deal of information with very little expense, but wording can change the answer provided by those who are questioned, so watch out for that. Good results require large samples that are representative of a population. There is a difference between a random sample and a representative sample, however. Random sampling is when given a population, each member has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample, and not every person gets a questionnaire. A representative sample, however, is when the people who are taking the survey represent the total population. However, surveys are self-reporting, so people may make the results vary due to their will to be socially acceptable. This is why blind and double-blind procedures are used and work so well. It's also key to hide information that may increase user bias. Case studies, surveys, and naturalistic observation describe behaviors and do not claim to explain them. Okay, so that's it for part 1. I'm hoping to turn this into a series, so please let me know what you guys think. I know it's a bit longer than my usual content, but I hope you all enjoyed it anyway, and have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.